Welcome to Focus on the News. This is Senator Dick Black, and I'm joined today by a great guest, Scott Menio. This is June the 5th, and our topic is going to center around Uganda's Anti-homosexual Act of 2023, which has engendered a little bit of controversy in Washington. But let me just say, as we start, Scott Menio has been one of the heroes of the school movement in Loudoun County. And most people, I think, are aware that the current wave of opposition to pedophilia in the public schools and the racism, the critical race theory, it was generated out of Loudoun County public school system. And in very large measure, Scott Menio was there, one of the foundational players, one of the guys who actually generated all of the heat and light over this thing. So Scott, it's good to have you with us today.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate you having me.
Scott, did you see, before we get started, did you see what has happened to the Fox cable channel since they fired Tucker Carlson? And any thoughts on that?
Well, I tell you what, it was not a brilliant move, and just to give it a little bit more, I don't know, insight. Trump had a town hall on there the other day, and he couldn't even bring back their viewers. He had the lowest attended town hall that was on for President Trump. A lot of people were just not tuning in, even to watch President Trump, because they are so disgusted with Fox News.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, including myself, the termination of Tucker Carlson was really a rejection of the entire conservative movement. All of the things that are so hot, the pedophilia in the schools, the critical race theory, the concern about these overseas engagements at the same time that we're ignoring our own border. All these things, all of a sudden, you can tell that the Fox leadership is saying, "Hey, look, we gotta tone it down. We don't want that." But the results are quite interesting. There was a poll taken. It's just a routine poll that's done. I think it's like weekly, and it shows that during this month of May, Fox has lost 32% of its primetime viewers. Almost a third have dropped out. And what is really horrifying for the station is that 44% of their prime demographic audience has left. Now, the prime demographic audience, you take out the people who are very young, you take out the older people, and you get this middle group, the people who are forming families, they're moving to new cities, they're buying houses and furniture and refrigerators and all of these things. So they're the big consumers. When people get older, they don't consume as much. They kind of got what they want. So when you lose that demographic, that's the demographic that pays the bills, because advertisers, they don't want to just know how many people you got, how many 6-year-olds are listening in to your advertisement on selling Mercedes-Benz automobiles. It's not too important. But what does matter is, certain demographics. So that is a mammoth hit on them, isn't it?
Oh, it certainly is, and and I think they're playing Russian roulette here, because the powers that be over there probably think, well, we're Fox, we can rebound. We'll just move, Hannity, or we'll move, Laura Ingraham into that slot. It's not about Laura Ingraham or Sean Hannity or Greg Gutfeld or any of these other characters. or personalities in the network. I mean, they could bring O'Reilly back and it wouldn't make a difference. Simply because of what they've done. It's not the personality, it's what they've done. And people, I strongly believe since 2020, election night 2020, people have it's just been on a downward trend as far as people, like, we quit watching Fox 2 years ago. Just because it's just the level of the way they were expressing themselves and conducting themselves, with the exception of your Tucker Carlson and your Laura Ingraham, it was just not in line with the Fox prior to 2020. And I have a hard time seeing how they're going to rebound, and I'm not so sure that they care about rebounding.
I don't know. It does make you wonder. Boy, there was a Rasmussen poll, and I think what's happening is there is a shift, and I don't think it's just a blip on the screen. I think there is a genuine cultural shift that's taking place. And the awareness of homosexuality that started with the school explosion in Loudoun County and really has swept the nation. It's swept all of the world, really. And so this Rasmussen poll, so it's checking on the gender ideology, and it says 71% of adults still agree that there are only two genders, male and female. Makes you wonder about the others. 29%, they have spikes coming out of their head or what. But still, it's a wake-up call to people who are running for public office. It says that 67% of Democrats, almost precisely 2/3, concur that male and female are the only two genders. That's Democrats who are saying that. There are 62% that think that sexual mutilation surgeries on children should be outlawed. This particular article, I think this might have, let me see, this was I'm not sure exactly where it originated, but they referred to surgical interventions. Well, when you slash somebody's breast off, or where you take off their penis, that's not a surgical intervention. That is a sexual mutilation. In any event, there's this quite a drift away from being enamored by all this homosexual business. It comes right at the beginning of Gay Pride Month. That what an abomination! What's your thought about when you hear Gay Pride Month? What are they being proud about?
Well, that's a great question, because if you're gay, or a lesbian or whatever, it's an attribute, right? So we don't need an entire month to celebrate somebody's attribute, and especially coming off the back of Memorial Day, one day. I think it's sacrilegious. I think it's absurd. And what people have to understand, and a lot of people are still just kind of catching on, or watching with one eye, is the use of pronouns is like it's tantamount to a gateway drug, right? Because you start using the pronouns, or you start accepting the uses of pronouns, and maybe you buy into it yourself. All you're doing is feeding into this ridiculous narrative. And at the same time, we are because of incrementalism, because you've had little, a rainbow flag here and a little thing there, and before you know it, we're in the position that we're in. And I think a lot of people need to really understand that if you don't want to hurt if you don't agree with the whole pronoun game, then don't play along, because all you're doing is feeding into this nonsense. And look, if somebody's gay, go be gay, right? Don't distract me. Don't push it into the schools. Don't try to create special rights and privileges. I mean, there's an LGBTQ Bill of Rights that was passed last year, a Bill of Rights. These people are no different than you and I, but yet they want to scream and they want to be special. They want to be put on a pedestal, which I absolutely reject. And the more you push it on, I think people were tolerant. But now I think people are becoming like, no, this is way too much. You guys have lost your minds.
Well, when I think of the Homosexual Pride Month, I think of all of the cases that came across my desk when I was chief of criminal law division at the Pentagon. And there were so many instances where a first sergeant would get a new fellow in the company drunk and go out and forcibly sodomize him. There would be cases where you'd have soldiers who had homosexual soldiers who had gone out and infiltrated the Boy Scouts and taken Boy Scouts out, raped them. I remember one terrible one where there was a boy being anally sodomized by a scout leader and screaming, oh my God, help me, help me. And, so that's what I think when I think of gay pride. There is a tremendous element of pedophilia within the entire homosexual community. So I think, I think it's important. I think to some extent, I think people are waking up. When they hear the term grooming, they know what that means. They know that you're talking about homosexuals trying to break down the resistance and the barriers to children, resisting, running away from these people. And we're doing it in the public schools, aren't we?
Big time. They're trying to normalize things, and they're working very hard at it. For example, when a corporation has a product that isn't doing too well, they do what? They try to rebrand it. And so what these lunatics are doing is they're trying to rebrand pedophilia with the terminology MAP, minor attracted people or person. And that is what that is trying to do is these lunatics are saying that pedophilia is such a derogatory term. Well, of course it is, because it shouldn't be. You should be buried beneath the jail if you are one of these people. But people have to understand that this is how the far left and the liberals operate. Is they change tactics, they change terminology, and minor attractive person sounds like a flowery, accepting term. You have to be careful, because this is how they're starting to push it. They're not going to push things with pedophilia in the title. They're going to push things with MAP or minor attracted person, because it's not caught on just yet. But this is what they do. I mean, how many flags do we need that represent? I don't know. I mean, is it really necessary to have 72 different letters in their acronym of LGBTQ plus, and it keeps growing? There's no need for it. It's just, they're not a special breed of people. Okay, so they need to stop pretending like they are, and stop demanding that the entire country, the entire world, acquiesce to them.
Yeah, what you say is, you make a very good point. They are not a special breed of people. They are people who mark their identity by their behavior. And I've known men who were, a little bit effeminate, but who were, just as normal as you and I. Great family men, no homosexual activities and stuff. So that kind of thing, it's not a question of, whether you're real muscular and robust and all that. It is behavior. It is the engagement in anal sodomy, principally. That's the big thing. Oral sodomy also, but it's the engagement in a really very unsanitary, very filthy, very disease-ridden type of sexual activity is a very depraved thing, very morally depraved. So even if they engage in it in the privacy of their own homes, it's not a very positive thing for society. But I'd like to get into talking about Uganda, and Uganda has just passed. The president has just signed into law a very comprehensive. It's the Anti-homosexual Act of 2023, and it's quite an interesting piece of legislation. Have you had a chance to take a look at that?
Yes, sir. I thought they're throwing the gauntlet down, is what that president has done. I think it's quite interesting. I think, I think life for just being gay is probably a little too extreme. I'm all for death penalty for pedophilia and sexually abusing kids. But at the same time, you have to look at this and say, okay, so these laws that he's just passed, I bet he's not going to have a big problem with the LGBTQ plus movement in his country. It's a deterrent. It's a fantastic deterrent. Whereas our country is the complete opposite. We're paying people to do this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting that what it does, the bill, as it like all legislation, it changed a bit as it moved through the legislative process. By the way, I read the legislative history of it, and this bill was very thoroughly debated and considered. The president modified it to make quite clear that just being a person who was homosexual is not a crime, but engaging in homosexual sex is a crime that's punishable by a maximum of life in prison. And then you've got this aggravated homosexuality, which is where you rape children, you commit sodomy with disabled people or mentally ill people who can't protect themselves, that type of thing. And so those things are punishable by death penalty. And but what's interesting is they seem to cut off. It's a bill that suppresses the entire homosexual movement. So it makes the sharing of homosexual pornographic material with a child punishable with up to 20 years confinement. Recruitment or transportation of a child for homosexual activities is punishable up to life. You can't. Now this is interesting. You're subject to 7 years confinement if you knowingly rent your premises to someone who wants to engage in homosexual acts on the premises, which I believe, and I'd have to study, but I believe that would probably include things like gay bars, gay pornography stores, the sort of the gamut of things. So it gives the law the oomph to shut down and eliminate this. It's got a 10-year penalty for anybody who engages in conducting or participating in a same-sex marriage ceremony. So that is not the place to go for your honeymoon if you got a couple of guys. But I don't know whether you saw that President Biden and Senator Ted Cruz have both come out and condemned the law passed by Uganda.
Yeah, I have. I fully expect that from Biden, and I once again have to state I appreciate the president's moxie, because what he's trying to do is save his country. For look what's happened to our country, right? Because we allow all this nonsense to go on, get into our schools, indoctrinate our kids with this crap, and Uganda is saying we want to preserve our country, we want to preserve our history, we want to preserve our people. So they put this very stellar, or not stellar, but very solid parameters around the entire LG. They've handcuffed the LGBTQ movement, which
Yes,
I applaud them for. Ted Cruz, Ted Cruz is missing the mark on this one. He should have just kept his mouth shut, because while he's trying to condemn Uganda for coming out with such strong laws, where is he? Because the laws in our country don't exist. I mean, they don't exist. They allow these groups to literally get away with murder, to do whatever they want. You look at cities like Portland. I know that's a little bit off topic. I mean, it's a disaster.
sure.
What's happening to our kids is off the charts, and this guy's worried about Uganda. No, maybe you should take a lesson from Uganda and try to get some legislation passed with the monacle of some of the attributes of the Ugandan legislation, and bring it into our country. Or Ted Cruz just needs to shut up about it.
Yeah, I was really astounded of all the people.
Right.
I have to confess that I was one of the state leaders of the Cruz for President movement. And I used to go and make appearances with him and that type of thing. And I was a Cruz delegate at the Republican National Convention. I was appalled by Ted Cruz siding with people who commit homosexual anal sex on children, and siding with them against the
Right.
government of Uganda. What gives with this? This is so strange.
That's a great question, Senator, because if you strip away or put aside a lot of the other, if you put aside everything but that one attribute where it's death penalty in Uganda for sexually assaulting children, he didn't agree with that. I do. I mean, if you sexually assault a child, I'm sorry, your humanitarian rights are over. But well, I don't understand what Ted Cruz is doing. I mean, he probably needs to clarify, because I don't think it was very smart.
No, I mean, why is he the only Republican who has come out in favor of the pedophiles in Uganda? I don't get it. And personally, it embarrasses me that I've ever supported the guy, but he describes this. He says that he describes this as an abomination that they would do it. Well, I don't know, it's particularly offensive, I think, to Christians that he would choose that word abomination to condemn what Uganda is doing, because that is the precise term that God of Scripture uses to condemn sodomy when he said, "You shall not lie with a man as a woman. It is an abomination." Leviticus 18:22. How can anybody who is a Christian, maybe he wants to say, "Oh, I'm not sure that the penalty should be thus and so," but to flip God's words on him and to use the term abomination for someone who is enacting a law that says precisely what Scripture says about it. Anyway, it's just it's interesting.
It's interesting. And then I would ask Ted Cruz, are their schools struggling with indoctrination with LGBTQ material? No. Maybe he needs to put a little more focus on that here within this country.
Yeah, I think different countries are starting to say, okay, we're finished with this Western paradigm of, let the courts decide everything, let them ram things down people's throats. And whether it's Uganda taking a strong stance against homosexuality, whether it is the government of El Salvador, saying we are sick of criminal gangs running this country, and we're throwing them all in prison. And but it's so bizarre. We're having to look to third world countries for some sort of a moral guidepost. Meanwhile, here we are in this country, crime is running rampant. People are being chased through the street. The last year, 21 people were pushed off the metro stop onto the tracks in front of oncoming trains. 21 people, and what do we do? Up in New York, they say, well, okay, we got to get after this guy Neely, or which one? No, Penny's the good guy, the Marine. We got to get after him because he subdued one of these violent people who's out beating people up in the subways, pushing them on the tracks. We got to go after him. We got to suppress the good people.
Right.
In other countries, in El Salvador and Uganda, they're changing the direction of the arrow, and instead of the arrow pointing at innocent people, the arrow now is pointing at the guilty people.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I mean, it's really astounding because El Salvador is actually starting to experience an uptick in tourism. And there's big money to be made in tourism, and the bold position that this president has made in just I mean, this hasn't taken 20 years. He's done this in like 5, and it's or maybe 4 years. But it's absolutely incredible. He came down with an iron fist. And to your point before, something's really, really off when you're looking at countries like El Salvador. I applaud the president's efforts and what he's doing there and what he's achieved. Uganda, and even Putin himself. We're looking at these presidents of these countries saying we need to be a little more like what they're talking about, because they recognize the demise of our country. It's a completely self-inflicted wound by the liberal left, and the Republicans that acquiesce and go along just to get along because they don't want to offend anybody by rejecting their pronouns or whatever it is. Our country has become wussified, and people just need to kind of step up to the plate and say, I'm not playing your stupid pronoun game anymore. And using the pronouns, but by giving into these people, you're allowing it to perpetuate. Don't play into the game. And there's a lot of faux outrage. Like I just saw before we started talking here, 42 shot in Chicago from Friday to this morning. 42. Last weekend, I think it was 42, and 11 were, and it was a 3-day weekend, and 11 were murdered. And so when you go back to the Marine that was restraining the lunatic, violent black guy, and unfortunately he choked him out and he died. When I see people talking about this black and white thing, and no, the black people are being targeted. No, that's not the case. Why aren't you outraged about the violence in your community? You're only outraged if a white man is trying to save people, and he kills a crazy lunatic black man in the process. I mean, there's a lot of faux outrage, but it's an interesting dynamic in Chicago, Senator. When you see a lot of the black communities, they're starting to see what is happening with all the illegals getting shipped into their city, and they are outraged, and they're starting to live and realize everything we've been saying all these years about illegal immigration and sanctuary cities.
Yeah, that's another topic, but I think people would be surprised to realize that the congressman from Harlem is no longer African American. He's now Latin American. Because what's happening is, as the Democratic Party is using the Hispanic immigration to dilute the white culture, they are also taking over black communities, and as they do, they tend to be more successful than some of the inner city people, a little more industrious. And what's happening is because the blacks are not defending their communities against crime, against moral decadence, against drugs, the only thing that the leadership is defending them against is police enforcement of laws. And as a result, their communities are decaying, and when they empty out, somebody's going to replace them. And the Democratic Party is ushering all these people across the borders. They're going to be sent once they get a foothold in Detroit, Chicago, Baltimore, these places.
Yeah.
Hey, you can buy a house in any of those places for $1.
Right.
You don't have to, it doesn't cost a fortune. If we're going to be flooding the country with illegal immigrants, well, let's put them in Chicago, in Detroit, and all of these decadent, decaying cities, and let them buy houses. We'll give them $1. I'll offer to give each one of them $1 so that they can buy a house in Detroit, in Chicago, and Baltimore, and we'll see where it goes. Well, listen, I've appreciated having you with us today. I think the good news is we are on the winning side of this culture war. People have finally there was a spark that needed to be struck. You struck it. Different people here in Loudoun County struck the match to the powder keg, and it hadn't stopped going off since then.
We have to keep it up, and I appreciate you inviting me on today, Senator.
Well, thank you very much. This has been Focus on the News, and we will see you back next Monday. You have a good week, and there's a lot of reason to be encouraged as the decadent world celebrates the Gay Pride Month. We'll be talking about gay pride as the month wears on. This is Senator Dick Black. Thank you for watching Focus on